Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Some Stops Along the Way, your podcast that explores some of the most interesting countries in the world through the lens of my work there, but also looking at their history, geopolitics, and culture. Welcome this morning. Hope you got a good cup of coffee in front of you or tea, whatever your preference is, and that you're ready to learn about a new country this morning. And that's the fascinating country in South Asia of Bangladesh. As we get started this morning, I want to ask you a question. What country that you've been to has the densest population? Think about that for a moment. And then think about what city that you've been to has the greatest population. And then think about all those times that you've been stuck in traffic in some large city and how frustrating that was for you, whether you were there for business or whether you were there for pleasure. I don't know about you, but I don't have an issue with large cities. I'm quite at home in the middle of a large city and very opposite of my wife, who really prefers to be out in nature. But there have been times when it almost became overwhelming. And I will tell you that Bangladesh is one of those places that if you're not prepared for it, if you're not prepared for this constant mass of people and noise and lights and chaos all around you, it can be quite intimidating. I remember my first trip to Bangladesh in 2005. I was told how populous and chaotic the country was, especially its capital city of Dhaka. But I had no real perception until I arrived there. And just leaving the airport was an ordeal in itself. First of all, the airport was absolute chaos. No one seemed to know where the immigration line was or how to get through the immigration line. There seemed to be no hurry on anyone's part about processing people through immigration. Once I finally navigated that, there was certainly no hurry in the bags coming up. And you would think after standing for an hour in an immigration line to get into the country that your bags would already be up, but certainly that wasn't the case during my first trip. I was still waiting for luggage. Finally got that, then walked out into the common area of the airport to look for my driver. It was absolute chaos, a sea of people. I remember just stopping and staring and wondering, how am I ever going to find my driver in this chaos? And it took me more than an hour to finally locate the person who was supposed to drive me. We navigated our way out of the airport through a sea of people, finally got to the car, and then it took us quite an amount of time to leave the airport grounds and get out onto the highway going into the city, where we were immediately stuck in traffic. And you can understand what happened from there. It was absolute gridlock all the way into the city. This was in 2005 during my first trip. And I remember sitting in the car and just looking around and saying, no one can prepare you for this. It is absolute mayhem. Fast forward now for 25 years, or 20 years rather, because my second time I worked in Bangladesh was in 2025, just earlier this year, and flying in again. They have a better airport now. Still quite chaotic, but a little bit better in the airport. But one thing that hasn't changed during that 20-year period was this overwhelming traffic and chaos as you navigate the city. The sights, the smells, the chaotic surroundings, it is so prototypical of South Asia, or of what one would perceive of South Asia. But Bangladesh in some ways violates all perceptions, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But Dhaka itself is one of the problems as far as this traffic and this chaos goes, because Dhaka is a city of more than 10 million people with a population density of more than 34,000 people per kilometer. Now think about that. 34,000 people in every kilometer. This is virtually people living on top of people. It is one of the highest population densities of any city in the world. And when you add to that the fact that while Bangladesh is still very economically challenged country, more money has been unlocked, more people have access to automobiles, which creates a glut in the streets along with their public transportation system. And so everything that I experienced in 2005 certainly hadn't improved, and one could argue was even worse when I went back in 2025 for my work. But going back now to 2005, I was there working on a project to assess the capacity of different sectors of the Bangladesh economy, including agriculture and apparel. And my time there was very beneficial. We got the work done. It was a very successful work experience, but it was also extremely frustrating. And the thing that made it frustrating was part and parcel of what I've been talking about, and that is it was hard to get anywhere. You spent a great deal of your time planning out how to get from point A to point B for a meeting at the time you were supposed to be there. You had no idea what the timing was going to be, because if you were lucky, you could get there in 15 or 20 minutes. If you were unlucky, it could take 4 hours. You didn't know. So there was no way that you could plan your day or plan any kind of meeting schedule. Fortunately, what I found out is that the Bangladeshis are used to that. And so they were very I lost the word. They were very conciliatory when it came to you being late for a meeting or being caught in traffic, because that was their life every single day. Now, in 2005, I really started to understand, or at least get a glimpse of, not understand, that's the wrong word, get a glimpse of the political climate in the country as well. And in our next episode on Bangladesh, I will talk a lot more about the history, culture, and political context of the country. But I'll give you a little bit of an overview to whet your appetite on that during this episode. The thing that made my work there in 2005 successful, though, and this is true in virtually any country that I've worked, it was the people. I met some fascinating people in this country, people that are emerging leaders that over time have emerged as some of the drivers for growth in the country. My second day there in 2005, I met a lady who has become a very good friend of mine, and who is one of those people that I was just referring to, and that is someone who is driving the political and economic trajectory of the country. Her name is Salima Ahmad. Salima, I hope, is listening to this podcast, and I'm going to have her on as a guest sometime because she's an absolutely fascinating woman. So the first time I met her, I did so in the context of her presidency of the Bangladesh Women's Chamber of Commerce, which she founded. And this organization remains one of the top women's organizations, not only in Bangladesh, but by reputation in all of South Asia. And it is so because of her vision and her forceful personality. When I first met Salima, I realized that she was very much different than what one would perceive as a prototypical South Asian woman. She exuded confidence. She was a decision maker, a quintessential leader, not just in terms of the women's business segment of the economy, but in the overall economy. She could hold her own with anybody in any context. And I knew when I met her that she was destined to move beyond the role as president of the Bangladesh Women's Chamber of Commerce, which she still leads today. And she did that. A few years later, she stepped into politics, and that is a story of its own, which I will share partially during the next episode. But in 2025, when I went back to the country, of course, Salima and I had stayed in touch, and I had actually brought her to Afghanistan while I was there to work with the Women's Business Association, where she provided a huge value. So we had seen each other in different places over the years, but had not seen each other in Bangladesh since 2005. So when I went back 20 years later, my colleague and I walked into the office of the Bangladesh Women's Chamber of Commerce, where Salima, being the quintessential host, had prepared a nice lunch, a homemade lunch, by the way, and tea and all the accoutrements. And she got a phone call right after we got there that she had to take, and so we were walking around the conference room looking at all the photos on the wall, and I noticed one from 2005 with her and I together at that same office. And I called my colleague over and I said, "Tell me who that is." And she looked at the photo and then looked at me and said, "That's a young you." And I said, "Yes, that's a very young me." And it just brought back all those good memories of the first time that I had met her. And actually, the first piece of advice that Salima gave me in 2005 after I met her is one that I took to heart during the rest of that project and when I went back in 2025, and that is have people come to you. Don't go to them. You'll be caught in traffic all day. Have people come to you. They have no problem doing that, and it'll keep you on time. It'll allow you to do what you need to do. Now, I didn't always do that because in the case of government meetings, you couldn't ask a government official to come to you. But in many cases, I took that advice, and it saved me a lot of time and stress and allowed me to be able to accomplish what I needed to accomplish within the time frame that it needed to happen. So I always appreciated Salima for that. You know, Salima and her husband are some of the major business people within the country. They have the franchise for the Tata automobiles and trucks in Bangladesh. They have many business interests around the country, but she is such a confident woman, but also has a sense of humility and self-awareness. There are many things that Salima is tolerant of, but one thing she's not tolerant of is corruption and non-transparency. She is really one of the drivers in a country that is known for corruption and non-transparency. She's one of the drivers of good governance throughout the country. And when she became a member of parliament years after my first visit, one of the things that she fought against most was corrupt practices and non-transparency. And ultimately, it got her pushed out of government because that fight is one that is a very challenging one in a country where the systems are not in place to promote governance and transparency. And yet Salima continued and continues to this day to be a voice of good governance, not just in Bangladesh, but throughout South Asia. That got her put under house arrest at one point. It is something that she felt so passionate about that she was willing to undergo the pain and suffering, if you will, and the political fallout that came with that point of view. And she continues to do that to this day. She also fought major health issues at the same time and went through an election cycle that was non-transparent and unfair. And all of these things hitting her did not diminish her resolve for good governance and transparency, and did not diminish her resolve to help the women of Bangladesh. And she, in many ways, is a hero of mine. Because there are people who do great things, but you wonder about their motives. I've been involved with many of those type of people. They do things for ego, or they do things for power, or they do things for their own agenda. Salima is not that type of person. Salima does things because she feels like they're right, and because they will make someone else's life better and more livable. She has literally paved the way for thousands of Bangladeshi women to achieve economic resilience, to improve their lives, improve their families' lives, and to change the perceptions in many ways about women in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is a Muslim country. And they had deep-seated norms and cultural and historical perspectives about the role of women in society. And Salima has done throughout her career an amazing job in breaking those norms. During that first trip, I worked with a host of Bangladeshi business leaders. And it was a stark contrast because in working with an organization like Salima's, the Women's Chamber of Commerce, and then working with other business associations in the country and touring businesses around the country, meeting some of the top business people in the country who were drivers of economic growth, I saw a huge difference in approach. Many of the organizations that I visited there during that first trip, I felt like were almost cults of personality, that they were a sandbox for the wealthy business people to play in. They were non-transparent. They were not inclusive. They really weren't accomplishing for the people of Bangladesh what needed to be accomplished. I never had that feeling about Salima's organization, because she empowered those women around her to take control of their own economic futures. And she became a mentor and a counselor and really a mother to many of these women, and certainly a role model as well. But the stress of working in that environment on a day-to-day basis could be overwhelming. And even with all the experience I had, even by 2005, and then when I went back in 2025, toward the end of my international development career, it was still a very daunting challenge, not just to navigate the bureaucracy and the chaos that is Dhaka and to a larger degree Bangladesh, but also to try to determine how the work that we were doing could help drive the economy of the country forward. So let me put that in perspective for you. I want to give you a little bit of context here that I think will help you understand a little bit more about the challenge of creating economic growth in a place with the historical context and the steep traditions of a country like Bangladesh. So here's some perspective. When I say Bangladesh, I am not giving you the full name of the country. The full name of the country is the People's Republic of Bangladesh. As I said, it's in South Asia, and it's the 8th most populous country in the world. And when I say that it has dense population, I mean that. Not only in Dhaka, where it's around 34,000 people per square kilometer, but in the country as a whole. Bangladesh has a population of around 171 million people in an area of 57,000 square miles. That boggles the imagination. And you can't really understand that kind of population density until you're there and it's all around you. Bangladesh shares land borders with India to the north, west, and east, and Myanmar to the southeast. It has a coastline along the Bay of Bengal to the south, and it's separated from Bhutan and Nepal by the Siliguri corridor, and from China by the Indian state of Sikkim to the north. As I said, Dhaka is the capital and the largest city of Bangladesh, over 10 million people. And Chittagong is the second largest city, and it is also the busiest seaport in the country. To understand Bangladesh, you have to understand a little bit about the dichotomies that exist within the country. The territory of modern Bangladesh was a stronghold of many Hindu and Buddhist dynasties, even back to ancient times. And following the Muslim conquest in 1204, the region saw Sultanate and Mughal rule. During the Mughal period, particularly under Bengal Saba, the region emerged as one of the most prosperous and commercially active parts of the world, known for a thriving textile industry and agriculture productivity. And these still exist in the country today. In 1757, there was a major battle called the Battle of Plassey, which marked the beginning of British colonial rule that lasted for more than 200 years. In the aftermath of the partition of India in 1947, East Bengal became the eastern and most populous wing of the newly formed Dominion of Pakistan and was later renamed to East Pakistan. This is important because of the relationship that grew to exist between Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh. Following over 2 decades of political repression and systematic racism from the West Pakistan-based government, East Pakistan experienced a civil war in 1971. And ultimately that led to the country's independence. The Mukti Banini, with aid and assistance from Indian forces, waged a successful armed revolution against Pakistan. And that was in spite of a genocide that was perpetuated by Pakistan. Bangladesh became a sovereign nation on the 16th of December of 1971 and was led in its post-independence by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman until he was assassinated in 1975. The presidency was later transferred to Ziaur Rahman, who himself was assassinated in 1981. The 1980s was then dominated by a series of dictatorships, but primarily one of Hussein Mohammad Ershad, who was overthrown by a mass uprising in 1990. Following a democratization effort in 1991, the Battle of Begums between Khalida Zia and Sheikha Husseina defined the country's politics for the next 30 years. Hasina came out victorious in this power struggle, but she was overthrown by a student-led uprising in August of 2024, and an interim government led by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus was formed, and Muhammad Yunus still controls the government to this day. And we'll talk more about both Sheikha Husseina and Muhammad Yunus during our next episode. Bangladesh is a unitary parliamentary republic, and it has the third largest military in South Asia and is the largest contributor to peacekeeping operations in the United Nations. However, Bangladesh has one of the largest refugee populations in the world and continues to face huge challenges, such as endemic corruption, lack of human rights, political instability, overpopulation, and the effects of climate change. When you talk about the kind of population density that Bangladesh has, you can't disconnect that from the impact on the environment. It has, outside of Lahore, Pakistan, Dhaka, Bangladesh probably has the most significant air pollution that I've ever experienced. Literally, your lungs can feel like that they are on fire because of the air pollution that exists, just because of all of the traffic and the industry, and coupled then with the factors that have changed its climate over the years. Bangladesh is very prone to flooding, and virtually every year, at least part of the country floods significantly. So because the country is so economically disadvantaged, the floods disproportionately affect very poor segments of the population, especially those smallholder farmers who make their living growing things like rice. These floods are devastating, and they happen, as I said, virtually every year. And so there are years when the poorest of the poor lose virtually everything they have every year due to these floods. It's not only loss of life, it's loss of property, it's loss of livestock, it's loss of crops. It's devastating. And it has created a system where Bangladesh government is not able to provide the kind of economic opportunity or to deal with all of these issues, from climate to economic growth, that is needed. And so organizations around the world have had to step in and continue to this day to do everything possible to drive economic growth in the country. But I would argue that the biggest hamper to economic growth, and if my friend Salima Ahmad was sitting here with me right now, I think she would agree with this. The biggest impediment to economic growth in the country is this endemic corruption and poor governance. We'll talk more about it in the next episode. But even with all the other issues, the traffic, the climate, etc., it is poor governance and lack of leadership at the national level that has continually unraveled efforts to build economic growth within the country. And also look at two of the biggest drivers of their economy, textiles and agriculture. Two of the most volatile and competitive industries in the world. In textiles, especially in cut and sew, what we call cut and sew, where you have predominantly women, not only women, but workers who are cutting and sewing garments. That's very price sensitive. And so companies who do that can very easily relocate somewhere else. And buyers are always looking for the cheapest price. So when Bangladesh is cheaper, they buy from Bangladesh. When the Indians are cheaper, they buy from them. Or when the Pakistanis are cheaper, they buy from them. There's a lack of customer loyalty. On the agriculture side, because of the climate issues within the country, and lack of crop insurance, and lack of technology, it's very easy for a smallholder farmer to lose everything during a particular year. So their economy is driven by industries that are highly competitive and that are controlled by a number of factors that are outside of the realm of the Bangladesh people to address. So combined with poor governance, a lack of systems to help drive the economy, this is a recipe for, pardon me, for things going wrong. I've been asked many times in my career, why does the United States continually spend money on countries that don't seem to make any progress? And I would ask the question a different way. What would be the effect if the United States didn't do that? If we just chose not to help countries like Bangladesh because they, even after all these years of support since their independence in 1971, they continue to struggle with some of the same issues. What if we just said, no, we wash our hands and we say, no more? There is a very big danger in doing that, because someone is going to step in and help these countries. It can be those of us, like the United States and Europe and others, who support democracy, who support transparency, who support good governance. Or it can be those countries that are on the opposite end of the pole, that only see the economic advantage of helping a country like Bangladesh and could care less about its governance or transparency, or even worse than that, want to continually promote the type of government that Bangladesh is known for, and that is a totalitarian, state-controlled government. The United States and other countries are among the most giving and the most humanitarian-leaning countries in the world. Does it benefit our foreign policy? Absolutely. But I believe our heart has always been in the right place, and certainly that's the case in Bangladesh. Salima has told me many times how much the United States has helped the women of Bangladesh through her organization and through others in changing not only their economic futures, but their perceptions. My first involvement, if you will, with Bangladesh wasn't in 2005 when I first went there. It was much earlier, back in the 1970s when I was a child. Bangladesh at that time was a newly independent country, and it was going through a horrible liturgy of catastrophes, from flooding to war, famine, you name it. And there was a organization at that time called Books for Bangladesh, and they advertised to recruit Americans to provide funding so that they could provide school books for young people in Bangladesh. And as I recall, if you gave a certain amount of money, and I didn't have any money really because I was a child, but the little bit of money that I could cobble together from selling lemonade or selling greeting cards, which I did when I was a child, I would give to this organization, and you would get a little card from a little photo of a child in Bangladesh who was receiving books and benefiting from the small support that you would give. And thinking back on that, I, as a child, knew, of course, that these children halfway around the world were in desperate need of support, didn't have education, and would benefit from those school books. But I had no perception of what their life was really like until many years later when I made that first trip to Bangladesh and saw the crushing poverty, the slums, worse than anything at that time that I'd seen. And at that time, my full-time job was living and working in Afghanistan. And so when I say that I'd never seen that kind of poverty, that's a big statement because Afghanistan's a desperately poor place. But maybe the better way to put it is I'd never seen that much poverty in that small an area. People living literally in shacks with nothing. And this was years after, more than 30 years after my few dollars given to an organization to buy school books for children. And I remember standing there in 2005 thinking, we've been supporting this country since the 1970s. What's wrong? Why am I here? Why are we still doing this? And it was a conversation with Salima and other business and government leaders in the country that helped me better understand why we're still doing it. And that is, this country, Bangladesh, and others like it, really stand on the precipice. They're caught between two worlds. And it's one thing for the people to know what they would like to have happen. And it's another thing for the government to agree with that or to move in the direction of making that happen. And with all the political instability, the political chicanery, the corruption, Bangladesh simply has not been able to close that gap, even until today. Now, does that mean there's been no progress? Absolutely not. There has been progress. And there's an emerging middle class. There are those in Bangladesh who have become, like Salima, who have become strong advocates for democracy and governance around the world. But it's still a big challenge because the mindset there, and in many countries in the world, throughout South Asia, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere, is that politics comes first. Everything's about politics. It's not about economic growth. It's not about governance. It's about who has the power and who can keep the power. And if that's your mindset, then everything else becomes secondary. The economy, the quality of life, the climate, everything else is secondary from being able to gain and retain power. Does that mean, as I said before, that the United States or other democratic-leaning countries should step away and wash their hands? No, I would argue the opposite. I would argue that we should double down in trying to benefit those individuals and organizations in that country who are helping to drive the change, helping to drive economic growth, helping to drive good governance, helping to drive the transition to a governmental structure that will be more consistent with helping the people achieve the economic goals that they desire and that they deserve. Bangladesh is a profoundly interesting country. And I hope that you will join me in the next episode of Some Stops Along the Way, where we're going to deep dive into its culture and geopolitical context and some of the leaders who have helped Bangladesh navigate its political path since independence in 1971, and also the effect that British rule and Pakistani rule had on Bangladesh, and the holdover of that effect that lasts even until this day. So, join me in the next episode where we're going to get deeper into the country of Bangladesh. But I'm glad you stopped in today for some stops along the way. Hope you enjoyed this initial highlight of Bangladesh, and we will see you next Monday, 8 a.m., right here on your podcast that highlights interesting countries around the world, Some Stops Along the Way. In the meantime, if you haven't read my memoir that is a companion for this podcast, Some Stops Along the Way, you can grab it on Amazon.com, along with several other publications that are available that I've written on Amazon. Just check them out if you have the chance. Until then, have a great week.